Hello everyone and welcome to this video. My name is Arston and today we're going to talk about Python, Lambdas, map function, filter function, and reduce function. So if you are excited with that one, let's go ahead and start coding. Alright, so before we run any Python code, the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that Python is installed in our local machine. And if you are sure already that you have Python installed, you can skip this part. And for those who are not yet ready, or you're not yet sure if you have Python installed in your local machine, what you can do is you can open up your CMD for Windows, or for Mac, you can open up your terminal, the ZSH. In this one, in Visual Studio Code, it has a built-in terminal, so we can open that by clicking this button that we have right here, or you can also toggle it by clicking this button on the top. And in this one, you can open the terminal. And as you can see, it also shows you a keyboard shortcut that you can use for the future. Now, if you want to check the current version of Python installed in your local machine, you can use the Python -- version. So it would return to you a version number if you have Python installed in your local machine. If it doesn't return to you a version number, it might mean that you don't have Python installed. What you can do is you can open your favorite browser and visit the python.org/downloads website. In this case, it would show you the latest version of Python for your operating system. In my case, I'm currently using Windows, and at the time of recording, that would be Python 3.12.4. In the future, this might change, so don't worry if you're using a much older version. All of the codes that we're going to use for today will work for the Python 3 versions. Next is, once you are done downloading the installer, you can install it in your local machine, and then you can open your Visual Studio Code or your terminal. Then you can try Python -- version again, and hopefully it would return to you the Python version. But if it doesn't, if you're using Visual Studio Code, you might need to refresh or restart your Visual Studio Code. Then try Python -- version again, and hopefully it returns to you. Next is you're going to create a folder. In my end, I created that inside my desktop, and I named that folder Python Lambda, map, filter, and reduce. This would be the topic that we're going to discuss for today. And inside of this folder, I also created a file with the same name, and then I added the .py extension at the end. So this would be a Python file. Next here, we're going to start our discussion. But before we talk about Lambda, the first thing that let's discuss is about functions. So to create a function in Python, we're going to use the def keyword. So def, and then you're going to pass here the function name. Let's call this function square. So this function would square a number. So we're going to pass here for the parameter, that would be number, and then a colon right here. And if you press enter, it would be indented, which means that all of the next lines of code that is indented will belong for this function. Next, we're going to pass here return keyword, and then to be able to square a number, we're going to multiply that number by itself. So number times the number, then we're going to return the result. Now, if we want to use this function, we need to call it. So let's say, for example, we want to print, and on this one, you want to square of 2. So comma, and then call the square function, then pass the parentheses, and the argument for the number parameter, we're going to pass here 2. And if you try to run this, there you go. It returns to us that the square of 2 is 4. So this is working. So this is how you can create a function in Python. And the lambda is also a function, but it's called an anonymous function, and it's going to be defined using the lambda keyword. And for this one, it would be created in just one line. Let's say, for example, we want to do the same thing. We want a function that would square a number. So we're going to use the lambda keyword. Next is we're going to pass here the parameter. So before we continue, let's add here the syntax for the lambda function. For the lambda function, you're going to first call the lambda keyword, and then you're going to pass its parameters. So the parameters here can be multiple parameters. However, for the expression, you can only pass one, and you need to separate them with a colon also. So you can only have a one-line expression. Next is we're going to pass the parameter. So in our case, we have here the number, so we're going to pass here number. Next, we're going to separate the parameters with the expression using the colon. Next, if we're going to pass here the expression. In our case, that would be this one right here, wherein we want to multiply the number by itself. And there you go. Next is we're going to store the return for this one inside of a variable square. And if you want to call this function, what we're going to do is, let's say, for example, the square of 2 again. For this one, we're going to call the variable that we have, the square, and this function, and we're going to pass the parentheses. And inside of the parentheses, we're going to pass the argument. So just the same, the number 2. And if you try to run this, both of them would run together, and they both have the same answer. So the lambda keyword is used to be able to have a function that is shorter. And for this one, it is made for us to be able to pass in a higher order function. A higher order function is a function that could take in functions as arguments, or it can also return functions as a result, or maybe it can also do both. So for this one, let's talk about one of the functions. For that one, that would be the math function. But before that, let's first have a little quiz. Let's say, for example, we have a task. So our task is we're going to square the numbers inside of a list. So let's say numbers. This would be the name of our list. Then to create the list in Python, we're going to use the square brackets. Let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So for this one, if you want to square numbers inside of a list, what we can do is we can use a for loop. So we can say for numbers in the numbers list. We're going to pass here a colon to indicate that this will be a block. And for each loop, and we're going to say, we're going to create another list here. This would be the squared numbers list. So we're going to set this one to an empty list for now. And what we want to do is for each iteration for this for loop that we have right here, we want to square the number that we're going to get. So this would be the number. We're going to say squared numbers list. We're going to use the append method. The append method is used to be able to add an item inside of the list. So what we're going to add is the number multiplied by itself. So once the for loop is done with its iteration, then we can try to print the output. So comma, and then what we're going to do is we're going to print the squared numbers. And if we try to run this, here we can see the output is a list with all of our items inside of the numbers squared. So we have 1, 4, 9, 16, and 25. So this is what we normally do when we want to square numbers inside of a list. But we can also use a built-in function that would be the map function. So the map function would allow us to be able to apply a function to each item in an iterable. So let's try that out. Let's say, for example, down here, we can call the map function. Before that, let us add first the syntax so that we can have this one in our notes as well. The map syntax would be map function, and then here you're going to pass a function as the first parameter, and then next is the iterable. There you go. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the map function right here, and then earlier we learned about lambda, and it is also a function but much shorter, and it's going to use the lambda keyword, so we can use it here as our function. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the lambda keyword. Then we're going to pass the arguments. The parameter that we're going to pass here would be our number. So number, and then colon. Here, we want to square the number. So number multiplied by itself right here. And then we're going to also pass the second argument for our second parameter here, which will be the iterable. We're going to pass here the numbers list. So let me try to comment this out right here. There you go. So here what we did is for the first parameter, that will be the function, we passed here the argument, which is a lambda function. So this lambda that we have right here, we're going to pass first the first parameter, that will be the number. So that will be retrieved in each iteration. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply that number with itself, and we're going to get that number inside of the numbers list. Next is we'll try to print out the output for this one. So we're going to create a variable output. Then let's try to print the output. And there you go. So let's try to run this one. Here we can see that the map function would return to us a map object. And on this one, what we can do is we can convert this into a list using the list function. So let's say here, let's pass list and then parentheses, and we want to encapsulate the map function inside of the list function so we can convert the map object. Next, this would return a new list of the squared numbers. So we will try to print out that list and call this one squared numbers. There you go. So here, if we try to run this one, as you can see, it returns to us the squared numbers. So we have here squared numbers of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That would be 1, 4, 9, 16, and 25. So this is how we can use the map function to allow us to be able to apply a function, which is our lambda function right here. We want to apply the function to each item of our iterable, which is the numbers right here. So it can work on lists and in tuples also, and etc. There you go. So let's have our new task. So let's try to remove this one, but I'm going to leave out the numbers that we have right here. Now let's say, for example, let's add more numbers to this one. Let's say 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10. There you go. Next is, let's have a task wherein we want to filter out all of the even numbers inside of our numbers list. So if you want to filter out, let's create another list, even numbers. We'll set this to an empty list for now. Then we're going to use the for loop to iterate over each of the items inside of our list. So for number in numbers list, then we're going to pass here a colon. Then if the number modulo 2 equals to 0, this means that the number is divisible by 2. We're going to append that number or add that number to our even numbers list using the append method right here. So we want to append that number. Then once all of the iteration is done or the for loop is done, now what we can do is we can print the even numbers list. So comma and then even numbers. Let's try to run this out. So here we can see that we are able to filter out all of the even numbers inside of our numbers list. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 10. So this is what we usually do when we want to filter out the even numbers in our numbers list. But for this one, we also have a dedicated built-in function in Python. That will be the filter function. So let's try to comment this out. There you go. So if you want to use the filter function, the syntax for that one. So that would be filter, then a pair of parentheses, and we're going to have the function for our first parameter, and then an iterable for our second parameter. There you go. Next is the filter function is used to be able to filter out elements from an iterable like lists or tuples or sets. So for this one, it would be based on the function that we have right here. So what does that mean? Let's first, example, let's use the filter function, and then let's pass here the opening parentheses and closing parentheses. Next is we're going to use our lambda function. So if we want to filter out all of the even numbers inside of our numbers list, what we're going to use is we're going to use this one that we have right here. So we're going to pass here a function using the lambda keyword. So lambda, then our parameter would be the number. Then we're going to add here a colon. Then what we want to do is we want to filter it out. So if the number modulo 2 would be equal to 0, this means that the number is a divisible of 2. Next is we're going to add the second argument. This would be the iterable. This would be our numbers list. Next is we're going to store it inside of a variable. So let us try to print out the output for this one. So we're going to pass here output, and then we want to print this out. There you go. So let's try to print this. So let me clear my terminal for now so that we can see it a little bit better. There you go. So here it would return to us a filter object. Now this filter object that we have right here, this is also an iterable. So what we can do is we can convert this into a list. So to do that, we're going to encapsulate all of this inside of a list function. So list, we're going to convert it, and the return for this one would be a new list of even numbers. So I'm going to copy this one, place it here. This will now be even numbers. Let's try to run this one right here. As you can see, it returns to us the even numbers. That would be 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 10. So what happened here is that the function that we added, which is the lambda that we have right here, this would return to us either a true or a false. So if the function returns a true, it means that we will keep that item. So here, if we say number modulo 2 and it will be equal to 0, it means that the number that we're currently looking at, or the item, would be divisible by 2. So if it is divisible by 2, it means it is an even number. Therefore, it would return a true. And in that case, we want to keep that item. Next is if it returns a false, let's say, for example, we're going to see a 3, that would be 3 modulo 2, that would be equal to 1. Then we will not keep that number because it would return to us a false. So therefore, in this method that we have right here, by using the filter function, we can filter out the numbers inside of our list if we want to see only the even numbers. Okay, so that would be for the filter function. Next is, let's have another task. Let's try to delete the other parts that we have right here. Let's say, for example, we want to multiply all of the numbers that we have inside of a list. So if you want to do that, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create the total variable that we have right here. So we cannot pass here a 0 because if it is multiplied by 0, it would be total to 0. So what we can do is we can use a for loop. So for number in numbers. So basically, we're going to loop through each of our items inside of our list. Next is what we're going to do. We're going to access the total variable. Then we're going to use the augmented assignment multiplication here. So that would be asterisk in equals, and we're going to multiply the number. So what this would do is that it will multiply the number, which is 1 to 1, and then the answer for that one would be stored as the new value for the total. So in the next one, this would be 2 and 1, so that would be 2, and then 3 and 2, that would be 6, and so on and so forth. So let us continue. So once the loop is done, you can print out the total. So total, then comma, total. So if we try to run this out, let's just make sure that our terminal is clean. So let me clear this out. So if you run this, it will show you that the total of all of our numbers that we have here inside of our list is 120. Now, we also have another function that we can use, but this is not a built-in function. So this one would be called the reduce function. It is available for the functools module. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import the functools module. So going to say from functools, and we want to import the reduce function. So for this one, we're going to call the reduce function, pass a pair of parentheses, and for the first parameter, so this would be the syntax of reduce. So reduce, and then function, that would be the first parameter. Second parameter is an iterable. So here, you can also use the lambda function. So if you want to multiply all of the numbers inside of a list, we need to add here a lambda function. Then we're going to get the number 1 or the item 1 and the item 2. So we want to store that inside of a parameter num1 and then another parameter num2. So we want to take the first two items inside of our list. So what we want to do with both of those items, we're going to multiply them together. So num1 and then num2. So once both of them is already multiplied, it will take the second one. So that would be 3. So the answer for this one, that would be 1 times 2, that would be 2. And then multiplied by 3, then that would be 6. So, and so on and so forth. Next is, here, we're going to pass the iterable. That would be the list of the numbers that we have right here. So we're going to pass numbers. Next, we're going to store this inside of a variable. So this would be the total or the product of all of the lists that we have here, or all of our list items. So we're going to store this inside of a variable named product. Then we want to print our product. So comma and then product right here. So in this one, if you try to print this out, as you can see, it would also return to us 120, just like what we have before. So this would be the reduce function. The reduce function will perform the function on the first two. That would be our number 1 and number 2 items that we have inside of our list. And then once the first two function is already multiplied, it will then repeat the process until there is only one value that remains. That will be the product of all of the numbers that we have inside of our list. So that is the Python Lambda map, filter, and reduce functions. So I hope you enjoyed this video that we have for today. And if you like this video, can you drop a like and comment? And if you also like to subscribe to the OneCodeCamp channel, that is greatly appreciated. And see you on our next videos. So have fun, everyone, and have a great day.